Well, hello everybody, and welcome back. We're here with Nidhal McCormick out in California, and I wish I was in California. I was just telling her she's all golden sun-kissed, and I'm Michigan winter not sun-kissed. We're here today. We are going to talk stages of grief. We talk about different stages that there might be, whether there's 5, whether there's 7, whether there's 12. Really wanted to get Nidhal's perspective. So Nidhal lost her husband. I hate saying the word lost. Your husband died 5 years ago. I hate saying lost because it's like I don't know, like they're gone forever from all of anything you do. And I just don't feel like that's the case. But so 5 years ago, Matt died, had been battling cancer for quite some time. And so you became a young widow. And wanted to talk some of these stages of grief that are the most commonly talked about, and when maybe you identified with those stages, and if you felt like they came in any order or any time frame, which we talk about not happening. It doesn't come in an order or time frame, but kind of your perspective. So the first is denial is the big one. So what was your kind of experience with maybe the denial of Matt's death?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me again.
Yeah.
I love chatting with you in hopes that my experience will help someone else and will help other people going through this to know like they're not alone. That's for me the whole goal of continuing to discuss grief, even though, it's been 5 years. I think it's given me a new perspective now to be able to look back and hopefully help someone along the way as well. So what you said is absolutely true. Stages of grief do not come in an order and they are not timed. And so I found that, I had different parts of the stages even 2 years later, 3 years later. And so the first one is denial. I think for me, when Matt was alive, I went through a little bit of denial that he would ever die. And I don't know if that is really kind of a stage of grief, but for me, because Matt was very ill, had a very rare cancer, and it wasn't looking good, just speaking to the doctors, they never said like you're terminal. They never spoke those words. But Matt had leukemia as a child, and the result of getting treatment for 5 years for that leukemia gave him cardiomyopathy. So he had heart issues and an enlarged heart, and was in and out of the hospital a lot through our young relationship anyways. And so I was used to him being very sick. So when he got this rare nerve cancer, we knew that it was going to require a very aggressive treatment, but also that would be extremely difficult on his body because he was already compromised and that, his heart was compromised and other things. So I think I sort of started wrapping my mind around like, okay, Matt could die, but then I also went through some grief while he was alive. But then I also was in denial that he would ever die. So I know that sounds really confusing, but that's just sort of how grief goes. You go through waves of like, of course he's not going to die. He's going to live forever. He's made it through everything else for 10 years of our relationship. Now he's going to make it through this as well. But then there's moments where reality hits you and you're like, this could actually happen, and I need to maybe come to terms with that. And depending on who you are, you try to set that aside and move on. As a caregiver, you're also so busy and there's so much going on that you don't have a lot of time to process every little thing. And so I don't know that I was in a lot of denial after he died, because I sort of just was in shock. And then it was like, okay, this happened, I'm going to work. And I went to work 11 days later, just to sort of like not think about it. Because when you are with someone and your whole life is consumed by what they're going through, especially if you are a caregiver, it becomes extremely difficult after they're gone to, number one, reestablish your role as a person. Like, who are you now that you're not a full-time caregiver? I was also full-time working. And then also it's so silent, especially if you don't have children, which we didn't. It becomes really unbearable to sit through that much silence constantly. And so I went to work and just kept busy. So I don't know that the denial stage necessarily looks like the textbook denial that's out there. But I do believe that a lot of people probably do initially go through denial, especially if the death was sudden. I think that would be a little bit more, that stage would be a little bit more prominent versus like someone's sick for a long period of time.
Now, after that is supposed to come, they say anger. And I would guess it might be the same where you've got different ways of death where you have the prolonged leading up to a death or you have the sudden. And I could see where these are coming all over the board. And that's why the stages of grief is really kind of crazy if you think about it, because nobody goes through the same death path, if that makes sense. So where did you ever see yourself land in anger, or did you have to work through some anger along the way?
I did. And I think that came a lot later because I consumed myself in work and decided that I was going to date fairly quickly because I thought all of that was just like distract yourself as much as possible. And then you never have to deal with any of this. And that's not true. Eventually grief is going to come out in one way or another. You're going to grieve in some way. For me, I just didn't want to hurt. And so I did things that I thought were just going to like make it all okay. Which I don't recommend, by the way. I recommend you take some time to properly grieve. And maybe dating is grieving in a way. Maybe it's just the company of like not being alone, you know? And so whatever you decide to do is okay. It's a process and you're going to make mistakes and all of that is okay. I think I did eventually get angry that this was my life when my life didn't come together as quickly as I thought it was going to after. Because I'm so like, I am a person that was a caregiver, was very successful in the corporate world. So I had these things going on and I just wanted everything to fall back in line and for me to be okay. And like, okay, yeah, this happened and it's devastating, but I'm not going to deal with it. And then a couple of years later, I think when I was still struggling because there was so much grief I had not dealt with, and it was starting to seep out in different areas, that I just got really angry with God more than anything else, about why this was my life and why, you know, why everything I planned for didn't happen. And why everything we had planned never happened. And why, you know, we spent 10 years together and now he's just gone. So yeah, I did go through a stage of anger. I don't know what the textbook anger is. Is it anger at the world, or is it just
angry in general? I think it's just wherever that emotion is, you know, pointed towards, that you just are angry, whether you are angry at the person for dying, at God, at life in general. I think that's what's hard even about some of these situations. There's nobody to be angry at per se. You can be angry at doctors, but is it really their fault? And that's where sometimes I get the anger, that people are really angry when they come to meet with me and they take it out on me. And it's like, I know this isn't about me. And I know you're just upset and you're angry right now and it's just coming out. And I know that. Luckily, I learned that with years of working in the business. But unfortunately, sometimes it's just whoever's in front of the person when it comes out, I think, is going to take it, whether it's the cashier person or a waitress or whoever, that it just, sometimes it shoots out of you when you're in the midst of grieving and feel bad later a lot of times. But I think sometimes you just don't know where to point it, and it's just there.
Yeah. And I think when you're hurting so deeply and you've gone through something so traumatic, and you're so devastated, the fact that the rest of the world is moving on and doesn't know your story. Like I found myself like wanting to tell random strangers that my husband just died. Like why? But it's because like I wanted to bring them into like what I was going through in the moment, because they were just acting like everything was normal. And that's really, it's shocking, because you're like, I'm going through this devastating moment and I'm so broken, and everyone's acting like nothing has happened, but nothing has happened for them. Yeah. And so, yeah, you do become angry at different people. Mine was more towards God for a time, because I felt like, okay, I went through this like traumatic experience. I was committed to Matt, though, for so many years and all of this. And why am I still experiencing grief? And why am I still in this place? And I just wanted it to all be okay quickly. And grief doesn't work that way. It's a process. And you just did go through something quite traumatic, even if you're not addressing that it was, or you're wanting to move past it, or you're wanting to be okay. The truth is you went through a very traumatic experience, and there is a process, and a certain amount of time has to pass before you maybe can get back to some normalcy. No matter if you try to introduce normalcy 11 days later or not.
I'm going back to work and I'm dating and we're good.
Yeah, that didn't work out, as you can imagine.
So now next on the list is bargaining, where, okay, if I do this, then this will be fine. And I feel like that might be a little what you're doing. Okay, if I start dating, then we're good, right? Like everything's back to norm. Where else did you see yourself maybe bargaining along the way?
Yeah. So I started feeling a ton of guilt around not being able to save Matt. That sounds really crazy, but something you said really registered with me. I was also angry at doctors because he was misdiagnosed. What ultimately ended his life, I shouldn't say killed him, ended his life the night that he did pass away, was that his blood pressure dropped. Now, was he sick to the point where it was his time? Yes. But specifically that day at the hospital, they gave him a pain medication that dropped his already low blood pressure, even dangerously low. And that's when he went into cardiac arrest. Now he was suffering and had an aggressive cancer and everything else that was going on. So was there mercy in that he passed away and was no longer suffering? Absolutely. And I can see that now. But I really felt a ton of guilt and was bargaining in that, what if I could have prayed differently? What if I didn't go to work and stayed with Matt longer? Like, did he know that I was committed, even though I had to go to work for certain hours of the day? God, if I, could have done something with the doctors, could it have changed the outcome, or, been more well-versed on the medication that was there was just so much bargaining in terms of guilt for me. And just really playing through all of the things that I could have done to either serve Matt better, which I know there was, and I did. I feel like now looking back, like I did everything I could, but you always feel that guilt of like, what else could I have done? If I would have done this, could it have prolonged their life? Things like that. I think at bargaining, that's kind of how I look at bargaining. I don't know if that's, correct. I think bargaining textbook means like, you say like, if you bring them back, I'll do this. I didn't do that because Matt was suffering so much. And like I said, I think when it's an illness versus a tragic death that really wasn't expected, like a car accident or something like that, I feel like these might play a bigger role. Whereas when you're kind of walking through a lot of illness and watching your loved one deteriorate and go through a process of losing their joy and their light anyways, and you're watching that and you love them so much that you want them to not hurt like that anymore, the bargaining perhaps sounds and looks a little bit different.
Because you wouldn't want them back in the state that they were. So
I literally prayed that. I said, I do want him back. And if you could bring him back, because, he went into cardiac arrest and they tried to resuscitate him for a long time, like 3 or 4 different cycles. And I just remember praying and I said, Lord, save him. But if he's going to come back in the state that he was in, then I don't want him back in that state, because he was suffering so immensely. He really wasn't living anymore. He lost his smile, and Matt was just full of joy and light and smiled all the time. So when you watch your loved one deteriorate to that point, the bargaining might sound a little bit different.
So then the next is depression. And I think everybody can, connect to depression in their life at some point, not just through grief. But did you hit or have moments that were debilitating, or did you find you were in depression for a long period of time at all during the years after?
Yeah. I would say now, looking back, I never sort of addressed in the midst of it that I was depressed, because I was so busy and I had taken on a new role in my career and it was very demanding. And so I always kind of stayed really busy. But I did find more and more, like towards like a year and a half later, kind of along the terms of the whole anger thing, when it sort of hit me, like, why am I still here? Like, what is going on? But the truth was, I hadn't really given myself the appropriate amount of time to really pursue healing in a proactive way. Healing doesn't just happen to you. Time passes, but healing is a proactive thing. You have to take steps to feel and address and acknowledge. And if you're a person of faith like I am, pray and bring it to God, or, whatever it is, whatever your process is. It's a proactive thing. You need to get healthy community around you. There's other things that happen. And so, yeah, I would say I hit rock bottom, probably a year and a half to 2 years later, where I was like, I haven't dealt with this. I'm miserable. And I was crying on a dark floor. Do you know what I mean? So like it came to that point. And then every time, so I traveled a lot for work. So when I was away, it was fine. And then when I remember every time I'd get to LAX, it was like, it would hit me like a ton of bricks that I was back home. Matt wasn't here and I was alone. And I just went through like such deep grief for like every weekend. Weekends were horrible for me, because that was like when I was away from work and I had to deal with the fact that I was alone and he wasn't coming back. And this is my new life. And so having to re-identify who I was, it really, really hit me, I would say about a year and a half, 2 years later. And I did go through definitely some depression, but not like long-term depression. It was like bouts of depression of like darkness. And then like, okay, I have to go back to work on Monday. So let's pull it together and do what we need to do.
It's like scheduled depression. Okay.
Scheduled depression. That's totally normal.
No.
No. And here's the other thing, like, you could like literally have waves of all of these things come at you in the most random ways. Like, for example, after Matt passed away, his Bible was sitting on a table and I was just in denial that he wasn't going to come back and read his Bible. And so I left it sitting out for 3 months. I just could not bring myself to put it away. And so you'll have moments where you're like, I'm not okay. And you'll have moments where you're like, I'm totally healed. I'm fine. And then all of a sudden you're going through like the thought process of how you watch them pass away at the hospital, and it's all replaying for you. And you're bargaining about like, could I have done this? I mean, it just all comes at you in different ways. There's things that trigger you, having to clean out his closet eventually, which I did about a year later, a year and a half later, was a big deal, so these stages also aren't in order, and none of them are guaranteed that once you've gone through this, that it won't like rear its ugly head again.
Circle back.
You may circle back again. It does eventually, stop for me, as at least, because I did eventually get to a place where I recognize like I have to grieve. and I have to allow myself to feel and not date. And so I stopped dating and, you know, all the things I was doing to waste time and have company. And so I went through a true healing process where I was really, really just like taking control of it, and not letting it just be a passive thing that I hoped would just go away. So,
which is more that acceptance, which is the final, is kind of that accepting, not just accepting the loss, but accepting your place kind of in the new world and where you're at, and what you have to accept is the new normal for your life per se.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I would say that happened for me like around the 2.5 year mark, maybe. Just because I did get to a place where I stopped dating. I stopped just wasting time with wrong people and doing fun things and just like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you have to have healthy company around you. You have to have a healthy community around you, because you are going through something, and you could really very easily fall into bad company and bad community that are like, oh, this is what happened to me. I've always been a faith person. I'm a Christian. Matt was a Christian. So I lived out this Christian wife life for so long. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know who I am. I'm free. Like, what do I do? And I need to like fill time. And so you can very easily start walking away from your true self because you're just trying to self-medicate. And so, so I think, you know, try to make healthy choices and surround yourself with people that love you, that can remind you of who you are and what's going and bringing you back to like a good place. Because, you know, when you're going through grief, it's very confusing to reestablish your identity once a person, especially a spouse, is gone and you don't have kids necessarily. So, you know, depending on what the loss is, I would say acceptance for me came once I really recognized, like, I went through something big at a young age, and I need to really give myself the time and space to deal with this.
Which is a big thing to get to that moment and to understand that, I think, for yourself.
Yeah.
So do you remember any moments where you were walking along, going to the grocery store, going to buy some noodles or something, and something hit you? Do you remember a moment where you had to have a public moment of grief and nobody really knew what was going on, but you couldn't control kind of what was happening?
You know what's funny? I started hearing so when Matt and I got married, we hired like a videographer, photographer for our wedding. And in our wedding video, there was a song that played when the video started. I don't know the name of the song now, but it's like, hey, hey, you know that song? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
Yeah. Your lipstick stinks.
Yes, that one.
Yes.
I can't believe I just sang, because I cannot sing at all. So that song would trigger me. It would be playing in like grocery stores, at the mall, at the airport, but not in a negative way. Like, I didn't really have any like public moments where I would break down, because I'm very composed and I can handle a lot of stress. I think that comes with being a caregiver. Like, your ability to handle stress is on another level. Yeah. And so I didn't have any of those. I did in my car all the time. In my own car, I would like sob all the time. But publicly, that song would come on, and it would just like, I would always like do like an I love you sign, because I just felt like that was Matt. Like, I felt like he was like, I see you, you're doing great. You know, so there was moments where I felt his presence, but not necessarily where I had a meltdown. But yes, things around will trigger you, whether it's a song or a smell or something they enjoyed, or, you know, so be prepared for that for sure.
Nice. And I've talked to several people where like exercising, I know you got into exercise big again after Matt had died, but I know that also is an outlet for a lot of what's going on in you, because you're kind of opening yourself up when you're exercising. And sometimes it can come out and it's not bad, but it just is an outlet for that emotion that doesn't have another place to go. Maybe. Did you find that through exercising, you were letting things out in a good, bad way?
Yes. Exercise became my saving like grace. Like I cannot imagine having made it out of this whole thing without exercise. And I had never exercised before. And when I was a caregiver and everything else, like there was no time for that. So I had really let myself go. I gained 30 pounds. I was feeling ill all the time. I was holding all of this stress in because you're just kind of in survival mode. And so you always, you kind of put yourself last when you're in the middle of that scenario. And so at least I did. I just didn't find the time to exercise. I wasn't a priority at that moment. And so I started exercising twice a day. And I had no idea what I was doing because I wasn't a gym rat before that. And so it was really amazing that the condo that Matt and I shared had a gym downstairs, like a condo gym. And so I started there. And as I would just go down there for like 2 hours at a time, twice a day, because I didn't know what else to do when I was home. And so I did that. I ended up like getting in amazing shape. I felt better than I ever had. And that was a huge part of my healing. And then fitness became just an outlet for me that became very healthy because I was able to have that as an outlet. But yeah, the gym can really do wonders. So I would highly recommend that if you are going through grief, do something good for yourself, whatever that healthy thing is. It doesn't have to be lifting weights. It could be yoga or, whatever it is for you. So yes, absolutely. That became an outlet for me that changed a lot of things for me.
Well, and that's also a control thing where sometimes when you're grieving, you feel like you are lacking control in a big way. Something was taken away from you, a person, a relationship, whatever it is, and you need control, and choosing where you want to put that energy, whether it's exercise or a new hobby of any kind, is you taking control of something else and can feel really good while you're battling this maybe not so good feeling. And it kind of can create conflict, which could get confusing as well. But having something for you is so, I think, important during that time.
I literally cannot stress that enough or better than you just did. It's so important. I think sometimes when someone has passed away, we want to continue to suffer in that. We want to continue to suffer because maybe we might feel guilt around like, well, I'm still here, they're not. I know that's something that people have gone through as well, but your loved one would want you to be healthy. Your loved one would want you to, implement positive things. So don't feel guilty for taking care of yourself after. I think that's the ultimate message. Like, it's going to be important for you to pour into yourself, whatever that is, prayer, working out, all of these positive things that you can do to help you along.
So good. So summing up, I think the biggest is there's all these emotions and all these stages you may go through, but they may not be identified as a stage. They can be an hour, they can be a day, they could be a whole month that you are kind of in one emotion or another, but there's no right or wrong way to move through unless you think you can skip over everything, which is just not possible.
No.
You can't club your way through, can't date your way through grief. But it does come in all these different ways, and it can come in waves, and it can come at moments you're not expecting. And having good people around you, having people you can message with. I think that is one thing I hear too is, every day I would get in the car and call my husband, or every day I would call my mom at 3:00. And when that time comes and you don't have that person, rather than at 3:00 being a train wreck every day for 6 months to a year, at some point identifying, okay, I need to do something else at 3:00 that day. not replacing that person, but replacing your habit of that person in a more positive way is not forgetting them, but it's almost honoring them by giving yourself a new avenue during that time. And maybe something that's just as filling, you know, calling your mom. Obviously you can't really fill a void of your mom, but you know, maybe find another friend you call, or maybe find something you do at 3 o'clock, or, you know, drink her favorite tea for a couple weeks and just, you know, just kind of fill that void with mom time rather than a phone call with her or something. But it's good to do.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think at the end of the day, when people pass on, I think the last thing they want for us is for us to drown and die in guilt. I've said something often now, because I do write now about empowering women and grief and all, you know, different things that I now write about. But one of the things I've said is, I know Matt wouldn't have wanted me to die in a death that didn't kill me. So, you know, you want to be really aware that you're still here. And if you're still here, there's still purpose for your life. And taking all of those beautiful things that your loved one brought to your life and using them in a constructive and powerful way to either help others or, you know, just be impactful for the rest of your own journey, because you are still here. And so there is still purpose for what you're doing, whatever that looks like. And I feel like we can either die in trials, or we can allow them to shape us into something powerful and more beautiful. So that's more honoring to our loved one than dying, even though we're not dead yet.
So good. That's so good. That's perfectly said. Well, thank you. Huge thank you to Nidhal for sharing with us, sharing her experience, sharing her heart. It's a big thing for someone to be able to talk about such a big loss in their life and to want to help others with that. So I'm so thankful she has given us so many blessings with 3 videos now getting to chat with her. So I'm sure more to come. We'll dive into Nidhal a little more down the road. But thank you all. And of course, ask questions, post comments. I will post links also in the description so you can find Nidhal's writing and find where her work is at, so you can check her out as well. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you on the next video.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.